Can you talk a little bit about how important a co-founder is? Because the last company I started, I say one of the biggest mistakes is that I started alone. It's like the loneliest experience to
Yeah.
start a company. Talk a little bit about the role of a co-founder and how important that is.
I think the answer is different for every entrepreneur, Jeff, because you have to know who you are. I would never have done this without a co founder. It is such a hard journey, both emotionally, sometimes physically. And to be able to have someone who is all the way in with you. Daniele's grandmother has a quote that we use, and it's part of our culture at Solv, which is multiply the joy and divide the pain. And in many ways, that is what your co-founder does, right? You're a partnership. You multiply the joy. You win together. But when it's hard, and it's often hard, you can split the pain between you and support each other on the journey. And so in my world, for Heather, I just would not have done it without the right partner to be able to share in that experience and importantly, complement me. As you know, co-founders are going out as a package in front of investors. And so I had both. I both had like the long-term relationship and support, and I had someone who, in terms of his skill set, was a great complement to me as well.
What are some of like the biggest challenges that you've had or biggest mistakes that you've made so far that you think about if you could go back and change?
Coming in as a founder with experience, one of the things that he and I have consistently kept ourselves accountable on, especially in the early days, was remember, we're not building for scale. Right? This is a 0 to 1 endeavor. And so let's be scrappy. Like let's use sticky notes on the wall. Let's keep it. Let's make sure that we are not building for the executives that we were a few months ago, and we're building for the founders that we want to be. So I would say that's the thing we did right. Probably one of the mistakes is recognizing areas where, as founders, we should have been releasing more of that responsibility to other folks on the team. So whether that's Daniele reviewing contracts at 3 a.m. as his third job at Solv, or me as our head admin entering everyone's names manually, into Gusto. There's just areas where you need to create leverage for yourself as founders. And I'd say one of our mistakes was, in certain areas, probably trying to be too scrappy for too long, right before, instead of making the investment in the team.
As a sort of non-technical founder starting a technology company,
yeah,
what's the most important thing that you've learned along the way?
You need a great technical co-founder.
Right.
Full stop.
How would you evaluate as someone non-tech, like you had that really great relationship where you knew Daniele already and you'd worked with them before. If you were starting anew and you were evaluating a technical co-founder, what kind of things would you do? What questions would you ask? What things would you want to evaluate?
I mean, if you're looking at an experienced technical co-founder, one of the important things I would really try and vet is how much hustle do you have? That doesn't tell me you're a great technical co-founder, but the will to hustle and build again is something that I think people underestimate, because the narrative around being a founder in the Valley or being a founder in tech is so strong that I think people get seduced by that and don't quite recognize the hustle and grit and will required to make it happen. That's number one. Number two, if you're not a technical founder, I would frankly try and find an advisor or colleague who can properly vet their chops with you, because you're not going to acquire that in this short period of time when you're trying to find a co-founder. So whether that's through an angel investor or a colleague that you've worked with historically to be sort of a partner with you to evaluate their technical chops. And when I say technical chops, that's also dependent on how technical is your product, right? But the thought of trying to be able to vet that on your own when you don't already have that skill set, I think would be very, very hard to do.
Yeah, I think that's right. And I think the idea of hustle, because at the end of the day, like the technical skills are somewhat of a commodity, right? Like there's so many people we know in the Valley that could do that part. It's really the hustle piece, which I think is totally underrated.
Totally underrated. It is so hard and so worth doing, but you have to really want it. And, I think people fail to vet that one because the that stage of starting the company is so euphoric. It's dreamy, it's what's possible. But you get the money in the bank and you look at each other and you're like, oh shit, like let's go build something. Let's go get a user. And that takes work, right? Especially if you come from a background where you have just worked at scale and you're used to the impact. I think what people don't recognize is how irrelevant you are when you're starting a company. TechCrunch articles aside, nobody cares about what you're doing because nobody's using it. You're not adding any value yet.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's the biggest thing for me, and having worked at Microsoft for now almost 2 years, is like the scale that Microsoft is compared to the world that I lived in with startups. It's a whole world.
It's scale, and it's also an appreciation of what it takes to get a user. Right? Like Microsoft doesn't have to do very much to have hundreds of millions of people A/B testing something. Right? If you have 10 users in a day, your A/B test is not going to be very conclusive.